Hello and welcome. We're doing Chapter 7, Attitude, from The Power of Awareness. Experiments recently conducted by Merle Lawrence and Adalbert Ames in the latter's psychology laboratory at Hanover, New Hampshire, prove that what you see when you look at something depends not so much on what is there as on the assumption you make when you look. Since what we believe to be the real physical world is actually only an assumptive world, it is not surprising that these experiments prove that what appears to be solid reality is actually the result of your expectations or assumptions. Your assumptions determine not only what you see, but also what you do, for they govern all your conscious and subconscious movements towards the fulfillment of themselves. Over a century ago, this truth was stated by Emerson as follows: As the world is plastic and fluid in the hands of God, so it is ever to so much of his attributes as we bring to it. To ignorance and sin, it is flint. They adapt themselves to it as they may, but in proportion as a man has anything in him divine, the firmament flows before him and takes his signet and form. He's saying that the world as you perceive it is yours to assume of it as you will. Your assumption is the hand of God, molding the firmament into the image of that which you assume. The assumption of the wish fulfilled is the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses where you have so long lain stranded. It lifts the mind into prophecy in the full right sense of the word. And if you have that controlled imagination and absorbed attention, which it is possible to attain, you may be sure that all your assumption implies will come to pass. When William Blake wrote, "What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be," he was only repeating the eternal truth. There is nothing unclean of itself. But to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. So everything is what you make of it. Because there is nothing unclean of itself, or clean of itself, you should assume the best and think only of that which is lovely and of good report. It is not superior insight, but ignorance of this law of assumption, if you read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar, or into some situation or circumstance an unfavorable conviction. Your particular relationship to another influences your assumption with respect to that other and makes you see in him that which you do see. If you can change your opinion of another, then what you now believe of him cannot be absolutely true, but is only relatively true. He's saying that if you're able to change your opinion of someone, whatever opinion that you had of them in the first place cannot be true. If it's anything that can be changed in the first place, then whatever concept you have of that thing is not absolutely true because it can be changed. If it were absolutely completely true, then it would only be what it is in the first place. But if you can change it, then it's not completely true. So he's saying that whatever assumptions that you have right now about the world and about yourself, they can be changed. Nothing is completely true because you can change it, right? The following is an actual case history illustrating how the law of assumption works. I love this story. One day, a costume designer described to me her difficulties in working with a prominent theatrical producer. She was convinced that he unjustly criticized and rejected her best work, and that often he was deliberately rude and unfair to her. Upon hearing her story, I explained that if she found the other rude and unfair, it was a sure sign that she herself was wanting and that it was not the producer, but herself that was in need of a new attitude. I told her that the power of this law of assumption and its practical application could be discovered only through experience, and that only by assuming that the situation was already what she wanted it to be, could she prove that she could bring about the change desired. Her employer was merely bearing witness, telling her by his behavior what her concept of him was. So she was thinking of him as this concept of him, and that's what he was showing her, was whatever she had thought about him. I suggested that it was quite probable that she was carrying on conversations with him in her mind, which were filled with criticism and recriminations. Recriminations? There was no doubt but that she was mentally arguing with the producer, for others only echo that which we whisper to them in secret. So be mindful of the conversations you're having in your head about yourself and about other people. I asked her if it was not true that she talked to him mentally, and if so, what those conversations were like. She confessed that every morning on her way to the theater, she told him just what she thought of him in a way she would never have dared address him in person. The intensity and force of her mental arguments with him automatically established his behavior toward her. So every morning she's driving to work, talking to him in her head, saying all these things that she would want to say to him but never does. So obviously that's going to create a negative image of that person in your mind when that's what you're thinking constantly and how you feel about them. And then she sees him, and that's how that's the same energy that he's giving her is what she's thinking about him. She began to realize that all of us carry on mental conversations, but unfortunately, on most occasions, these conversations were argumentative. That we have only to observe the passerby on the street to prove this assertion. So when you see someone on the street, we have thoughts about them, that so many people are mentally engrossed in conversation and few appear to be happy about it. But the very intensity of their feeling must lead them quickly to the unpleasant incident they themselves have mentally created and therefore must now encounter. You create it in your mind and you have to experience it. When she realized what she had been doing, she agreed to change her attitude and to live this law faithfully by assuming that her job was highly satisfactory and her relationship with the producer was a very happy one. To do this, she agreed that before going to sleep at night, on her way to work, and at other intervals during the day, she would imagine that he had congratulated her on her fine designs and that she, in turn, had thanked him for his praise and kindness. So now she's changing the conversations in her head about his behavior toward her, what he thinks of her, and that's the most important part. She's changing her perception of him, her assumptions about this person, and she's seeing in her mind the way that he treats her. And this is going to be important, I think, later, but it's important to change the way that the world sees you in your mind, because that's going to affirm what you believe to be true, right? Is changing the way that the world responds to you. So that's a big thing. But to her great delight, she soon discovered for herself that her own attitude was the cause of all that befell her. And again, obviously, if you're thinking bad thoughts, if you're waking up feeling like, oh, today's going to drag and work's going to be so long and horrible and I don't want to see this person, and, if you're putting yourself into that feeling, it's not going to feel good when you go and do those things or when you talk to that person, or if you're thinking about all the debt that you have and then you receive money and you're not excited about it. You're like, oh, this is going to go straight to a bill or something. The assumptions that you have, like this chapter is discussing, the assumptions that you have, that you place on things, are going to determine how you experience those things, right? She had negative assumptions about her boss, and that's what she experienced. But she went to bed, she drove to work, and other intervals during the day, she imagined that he had congratulated her. So she was changing those assumptions about the person, and it says that her own attitude was the cause of all that befell her. So let's see how this ends. I'm talking too much. The behavior of her employer miraculously reversed itself. What? His attitude, echoing, as it had always done, that which she had assumed, now reflected her changed concept of him. What she did was by the power of her imagination. Her persistent assumption influenced his behavior and determined his attitude toward her. With the passport of desire on the wings of a controlled imagination, she traveled into the future of her own predetermined experience. So she was able to change the way that someone in her world saw her. Thus, we see it is not fact, but that which we create in our imagination, which shapes our lives. For most of the conflicts of the day are due to the want of a little imagination to cast the beam out of our own eye. We want some control, right? It is the exact and literal minded who live in a fictitious world. The people that believe that you have to adapt to your world instead of the world adapting to you. That the people that believe that there's only one way to do things or that things can only be a certain way. That's not true. And this isn't even the only book he's written, but this is what he's talking about, is that everything can be changed. You have to be aware of the concepts that make things what they are to you and change them. So he's saying that the people that believe that nothing can be done, nothing can be changed, they live in a false world, okay? It's not false to believe that you can take control and that you can change your life. As this designer, by her controlled imagination, started the subtle change in her employer's mind, so can we, by the control of our own imagination and wisely directed feeling, solve our problems. You can solve your own problems. By the intensity of her imagination and feeling, the designer cast a kind of enchantment on her producer's mind and caused him to think that his generous praise originated with him. So he doesn't know, and this is an important thing too, don't tell the world outside of you how you want them to treat you. Don't tell the people how you want them to treat you. You create that in your mind. You create your assumptions about them, and you start treating them differently based on how you want them to see you. You don't say anything to them. So that way, when she starts acting differently, right, and he's thinking now that it originated with him, which is great because now he's feeling really good about that he's doing this good thing, and now he's going to go on to treat other people really well too. So it's kind of like a domino effect. But yeah, don't tell people how you want them to treat you. Just act as if, right? Often our most elaborate and original thoughts are determined by another. I love this quote. We should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began that subtle change in men's mind, or that the passion did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy, lighting up his eyes for a moment before it ran upon its way. William Butler Yeats. Okay, that's chapter 7. So that's a big chapter. It talks about your assumptions. Your assumptions determine how you see your world, right? So what seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be, right? It is what you make of it. You think it's going to be good. There's one quote. I don't remember who it's from. Maybe Roosevelt or something like that. It says, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're correct, or you are right. Something like that. Which is true, right? If you don't think you can do something, then you're not going to do it. Why would you if you don't believe that you can? Attitude. Yeah, it's all about your attitude. It's all about your assumptions and your expectations. Everything in the world, everything that we perceive, it's from an assumption that we place on it, right? So be mindful of your assumptions. Be mindful of the thoughts that you're having about yourself and the conversations that you're having to yourself about another person, right? And yep, that's that chapter. I'm going to end it there. I'm going to make another video, but I'm going to end this here. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped, and I love you, and I'll be back. Bye.